A murder case that spanned from Spain to Florida ends with a shocking twist. David Knezevich was charged with his wife Anna's murder after she vanished in Spain last year. Her body still hasn't been found, but will we ever know what truly happened or where she is? It's hard to tell, especially after David was found dead in his jail cell just this week.
I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. David has been behind bars since his arrest last May. Now, he was supposed to stand trial for kidnapping and murder, but his death closes a horrible chapter. Now Anna's family is left searching for any type of justice.
It was around 8 a.m. Monday morning when David Knezevich was found in his jail cell at a federal detention center in Miami, Florida. Officials say they performed life-saving measures on the 37-year-old. But it was too late. He was pronounced dead the very same morning. His defense attorney seemed shocked, like most of us, to learn the news, writing in a statement, quote, "The defense team is devastated to learn of this news. We sincerely hope that an appropriate and prompt investigation will be conducted," end quote. Now, the defense didn't elaborate on the details of how David died, but you can't help but think the pressure of an impending trial, the fact his case made international headlines, being held on no bond, facing a wrongful death lawsuit, and possibly facing the rest of his life in prison might have weighed heavily on him. And remember, he was in jail in the first place for what he allegedly did to his estranged wife, Anna. Now, she had been living in Madrid, Spain since December of 2023, a move she made for a fresh start, seemingly to get away from her husband. Just a few months into what was supposed to be a fresh start, she disappeared. So this was in early February, and she was last seen alive on February 2nd. Her last moments seen alive were suspicious too. A man wearing a motorcycle helmet was seen in her apartment building, disabling the security cameras by spray painting the lenses. Then the next day, Anna's friends received text messages from Anna's phone that said she was planning to run off with the man she just met. Anna's friend said it wasn't like her to do that, even questioning if those messages actually came from Anna herself. Then Anna went radio silent. No more text, no more calls, nothing. Investigators in both Madrid and Fort Lauderdale took on the case. With still no word as to where she was, detectives learned more, like that Anna was in a nasty divorce process with her husband David. The couple was married in 2011, according to prosecutors, but by late 2023, it was no more marital bliss, just contention. Prosecutors say it got that way after David allegedly didn't want to split the marital assets evenly with Anna. Now, in a voice note translated from Spanish on WhatsApp, prosecutors pulled one message Anna sent about her conversation with David, where he said he only wanted to give her 25% of the marital assets. Now, the note said, "Today my ex made me lose my mind. We were talking about the divorce and imagine what he told me. First, he told me that once I have papers, to give him the papers. And secondly, he definitely did not want to give me anything since he manages all the money. He would give me something every month. And then he said if I wanted a percentage, instead of giving me the legal percentage of 50%, he would give me 25% and 75% to him." Imagine that, because he is the one, he deserves the most of everything. I don't even deserve, because to him, I am nothing. At the time Anna disappeared, David never filed for divorce. But it's interesting the timing of her disappearance, which came 2 days after Anna gave David an ultimatum. Plus, when she disappeared, David was nowhere to be found. He told Anna's brother he was in Fort Lauderdale, when really, he was in Serbia. Now, months went by. Then David was arrested in May of last year at Miami International Airport. Officials say he flew into the States from Serbia, where he had been for months. Now, investigators believed it was David who was the man in the helmet last seen with Anna. Police in Spain even said they had security video of David allegedly buying the same brand of spray paint that was on the security camera and duct tape hours before. Then investigators interviewed a woman who said David asked her to translate a text message that was sent to Anna's friends after her disappearance. Then a driver in Spain reported his license plates were stolen. A license plate reader recorded those very same plate numbers on her apartment street. Now, that driver couldn't be seen behind the tinted windows, but the car with the stolen plates went through a toll booth in Madrid. Now, despite not seeing the driver's face, it all started adding up that David might allegedly be behind this. Now, according to the FBI, David rented the car in Serbia prior to Anna's disappearance and returned the car weeks later. And a lot of miles were on that car. 4,800 miles. Even with David locked up for almost a year prior to his death, investigators still haven't found Anna and presumably her body, leaving her family with so many unanswered questions in light of David's death this week. Now, in a statement, Anna's family wrote, quote, "The suicide of Anna's murderer closes a painful chapter in our lives, previously filled with the dread that he might not face justice. Now we may never know where he put Anna's body. It is a cruel final insult that we may never recover Anna's remains or know the full extent of the betrayal she suffered. Still, we remain committed to seeking the truth and justice for Anna through our attorney, Mr. Einberg, and preserving Anna's memory while honoring her life with dignity, strength, and love. We are thankful to the authorities that they continue to investigate and to search for Anna's body.
A heartbreaking statement from a family who just wants justice. In light of David's death, I want to bring on now prison consultant Justin Paperny. Justin, always great to see you, and thank you so much for joining me today. What's your reaction to David Knezevich's death?
It's a tragedy all the way around, especially for this woman's family. They're never going to get clarity. It's never going to be aired out in a court of law with evidence and transcripts, the digital evidence the government had. So now they're going to continue to suffer, live through this fog of uncertainty. Perhaps this person, the alleged killer, may take his knowledge of where she is to the grave. Now he's the only one that may know. So I feel such pain and agony for this family who deserves clarity, and they may never get it. It's absolutely terrible. I empathize with them.
Yeah, and it's just horrible. I remember us getting the news of it, and we were all just kind of shocked, even here. And it seems like it kind of came out of nowhere, but I can only imagine that something might have just like clicked, and he made the decision that he did. But what's it like for inmates or detainees while they're on the inside and some do choose to take this way out?
Look, the rates of suicide in prison are low, but as we know, it happens. And when the weight of a life sentence and decades in prison kicks in, when the thought that perhaps I could be acquitted gives way to the digital evidence they probably have, in some instances, it's just too much for someone to bear. And despite prisons claiming to have suicide protocols, it sounds good on paper. It sounds good for taxpayers and stakeholders. But in reality, if someone is that driven to take their own life, even in a higher security prison, it's absolutely going to happen. And now you could have his family, others saying, technically he was never convicted. He didn't do it. So they can create their own message. And again, the real devastation is for this family who is just going to continue to grieve and suffer through unanswered questions that a trial could have brought to light.
And one question in my mind is like how something like this happens, especially in federal custody. I mean, it's not out of the usual because we have seen it in other cases, right? But are there not around the clock checks that happen at night where, something like this, maybe a guard could have checked in maybe an hour or two earlier, maybe, just those typical checkpoints that you would think would happen inside federal custody. But what do you think happened there as far as just not being checked on for hours?
Look, prisons care about security and control. We know that. But if someone is that driven to take their own life, and if they sense any opportunity, they're going to seize it. So certainly the prison bears some blame, because when you have someone looking at life in prison for murder, and if there's mental health issues, well, that person needs to be on the radar. But there's only so much they can do. There's only so much money they have. We're in a country right now with spending cuts. We need to embrace that. Our nonprofit does work in California, and we got notice that all of the reentry funding has been cut. Let's embrace the last thing a lot of people care about are people in prison, right? So this is the sign of the times. And when he saw an opportunity, he seized it. And the family of this wonderful woman will continue to suffer. If you try hard enough, there is an opportunity, despite all the supervision.
And I'm surprised this happened now, because to your point, he hasn't gone on trial yet. So still we have to say allegedly, because he hasn't been convicted of any type of crime. And then on top of that, he had been in federal custody for about almost a year now. And again, to your point, he was facing what could have been the rest of his life in prison, awaiting trial for murder and kidnapping. But what are your thoughts on the case overall, given that the victim's family, again, to your point, will never see this case play out in the courts?
It was a very selfish move. If he had the mental ability to recognize it was a selfish move. What happens is you get closer to trial and you go through discovery. And though I'm not a lawyer, we've had people in our community, of course, work with lawyers going to trial. And the evidence comes out and it's like, wow, this is bad. They have this digital evidence. Wow, how did they obtain this? Well, this is what they do. They investigate all day. So the idea of having this air out in a public trial for the whole entire world to see, reaffirming or confirming that he's probably the killer, it's probably like, wow, I'm going to endure that. Then if convicted, spend the rest of my life in prison. And if there's some mental health issues, and you would pretty easily argue if he killed her, there's probably some mental health issues because a normal person isn't doing that. It's easier to say, I'm going to find an opportunity. that's a wrap. And based on his mental health and well-being, I can assure you the last thing he was thinking about was this family, is proven by the fact he allegedly killed this woman. He was never in their mind, and his only goal, probably the last thought, could have been, I'm going to, at least by taking my own life, allow them continue to suffer in some weird, sickening way. It might have brought him some joy, as sickening as that is to admit.
Yeah, and again, that's not out of the usual that we've seen something like that happen. And especially given that, again, not convicted of any type of crime, but I just think maybe he did this because, in a way, he knew that a jury could find him guilty. And what are your thoughts just overall, just kind of the length that he had went to? He, allegedly killed his wife. First, he tracked her down in Spain. They allegedly spray painted her apartment cameras, posed as a delivery driver, switched license plates, sent fake text messages, bought duct tape, just all of that stuff, all of this because of just a nasty, nasty, contentious divorce.
You've answered why he didn't want the trial. For all of this, again, to be brought to light on television and the news media, it's clear he is sick. He's not well. And unfortunately, she was with a man. Of course, she didn't know at the time that he had the proclivity to kill or violence, but he was very sick. And rather than get help, he chose to destroy and take his own life and really ruin the life of this family. The generations of their family will forever be changed because of the acts of this person. I empathize with them. I'm so sorry they'll never get clarity. The trial and conviction would not have brought her back, but it would have brought evidence. It would have brought peace of mind. There would have been value if convicted and seen that he was sentenced to life in prison. It would have brought at least some semblance of justice. Now they're left wanting. And I hope somehow, some way they can overcome. Maybe they can create a nonprofit in her name, bring more attention to mental health and how these things can happen. People who are strong somehow, some way find a way to contribute and find meaning through this experience. You have to, or else it's too depressing and devastating.
Yeah, and it just shocking. I feel like that's just an understatement, especially given this case. And it seems like, to your point earlier, just that he took everything to the grave, that also being the location of possibly where Anna's body is, which still hasn't been found to this day, and it's been more than a year. What are your thoughts now that you have the defendant who is deceased, still no sign of where Anna and her remains could possibly be, but do you think it's possible that a miracle could happen and maybe investigators would end up finding her body?
It's possible, though it's so much harder, right? Because the one person who probably knew is dead and gone. And it was a last act of selfishness and disgust and disdain that I don't care about anybody but myself. And even from the grave, you're going to suffer. So I commend law enforcement for continuing to invest. But at some point, if they don't have the information they need, there's only so much money they have. And I'll say it again, we're in a country where we are cutting and we're not spending to the degree that we were, including in law enforcement. So it's unfortunate. There's a chance they never find those remains, and this family will lack the clarity and certainty they think about and obsess about 24 hours a day. And so would I. What a disgusting act.
Yeah, it's just, again, we can't overestimate just how horrible it is, because it is. It's just a truly horrible story, and it's a horrible ending, a horrible chapter to close. As of right now, there are no reports of any type of note being left behind. But do you think it's possible maybe he did leave a note behind, or do you think he just kind of kept everything tight-lipped and just did what he did?
Perhaps, I don't know. What they could do is, what they will do is interview and interact with anyone he visited with and spoke with. And perhaps he shared some information. I have no doubt his family they too will suffer and say, who is this monster? Who is this person that allegedly killed this person? What can we do to try to bring justice to this family? So I presume the government, the first thing they're doing is speaking to any and all that he interacted with, looking at notes, looking for cues, and somehow, some way trying to ascertain or get some information that could point them in the direction of where she were. So they're going to go down all necessary roads. I'm glad they will. Maybe we'll see, but I don't know if he left a note. All I know is he tended to continue to focus on himself, even in that last moment when he took his life.
And I want to go back to just a little bit earlier as well, too, as we're kind of discussing just what it's like to be inside federal detention, all of that sort. Do you think that he was in solitary confinement when this happened? Again, investigators have been or officials have been very tight-lipped just in the certain details of what exactly happened. But I'm picturing, how did a guard not know? How did maybe a cellmate not know? Was he just alone in the cell when this happened? Like, what is it like as far as being in federal custody? And are you normally assigned a cellmate? Are you not? What is it like in there?
A bit of both. So, as you might recall with like Magnoni or Diddy, they may go to MDC and be totally isolated and be put on suicide watch. And the lawyers will come out and say they are not suicidal. If anything happens, they didn't take their life. There's going to be a lockdown period where they go through mental health assessments, constant supervision of the prisoner or inmate to make sure they're okay. They're not at risk to themselves or other people. So if he was in for a year or more than a year, he most likely was in this isolated suicide watch period of time. But if he's eating, if he's adjusting well, if he seems somewhat normal, attending visits with his lawyers, being proactive, if he's making phone calls from the regular phone that they can listen to and he sounds normal, they may say, okay, there are a lot of people facing trial for murder and doing terrible things, including people who end up on death row who don't take their life. So at some point, they probably moved him out of total isolation to a cell where he may or may not have had a bunkie with more freedoms to go to a recreation room, to go to a room to work on his case or prepare for trial. So it wouldn't surprise me if he had more liberty or a little bit more freedom within the prison when he took his own life. There's only so long they're going to keep someone on constant suicide watch. Imagine how many people are facing trial for murder if all of them were on suicide watch. The prison couldn't afford it. People would be on supervision, getting studied 24 hours a day. It's just not realistic or plausible.
I know we've had discussions before when it came to Diddy's case, just about federal detention versus state prisons or county jails, I should say. But what are kind of the main differences from a federal detention center to a county jail in terms of just overpopulation, possibly more eyes, maybe less eyes? What are the stark differences that you've noticed in your work?
I would say the biggest difference is really a federal detention center in many ways is similar to a county jail, right? Where you're going to be locked down, confined in a big building, a lot of supervision, very few access to resources or phone or email or exercise. Even the law library, can't get outdoors. Some people who in our community who are in that environment say, when I'm on lockdown, I don't know if it's day or night. They say that I can shower 3 days a week. It's once a week. I brush my teeth once a week. So there's a lot of similarities around that in that environment. The big difference is when someone ultimately ends up like in a federal prison, a medium, even a penitentiary where you're in a cell and there's razor coil and barbed wire. It is a huge compound. You can go to the library, you can go to the track, you can exercise. There's going to be a weight pile, there's a recreation room, there's TV rooms. So even a penitentiary will be a massive compound where you can feel free once you're outside of that cell, unlike a county jail or detention center where you really struggle with feeling confined, claustrophobic at all times. It's why I've said before on your program and others, once someone goes from a detention center or county jail, even to a medium or low security prison, as one client said to me, it feels like Disneyland because I have the other comparison being locked down nearly 24 hours a day.
Yeah, it's a very stark difference, especially from what David's life was before he was arrested to what had happened, especially towards the end of his life. Justin, I want to thank you so much. Always love having you on. Before we sign you off, though, do you think that Anna's family will ever get closure in her case?
I hope they do. If I were a betting man, I think the person who could have provided closure took that secret to the grave. And I think there was a sick pleasure he took in depriving them of the closure they deserve and need. And so if I'm speculating, I would say no. And for that, I hope I'm wrong and I'm sorry.
I hope as well, too. Not to say I hope you're wrong, but I hope that one day, obviously I hope that Anna's family does get closure in this case and some form of justice as well, too. Justin, again, thank you so much for your time today. I always appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And again, few details have been released, but in a statement, officials said in part, quote, "No employees or other incarcerated individuals were injured and at no time was the public in danger." Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.